multiplication of polynomials, or in this case we're going to go in multiplication of monomials. When we discuss multiplication of polynomials, we need to go to the simplest case, which will be the monomials. Okay, so we will find the product or the result of multiplying two monomials. So to multiply two monomials, let's say example, these are two monomials, 8x squared and negative 3x to the fourth. These are two monomials given. We will use the commutative and associative property of multiplication. So here we are to use commutative and associative property, and this is of multiplication. Okay, now how will this work? Multiplication to group the numerical factors and then the variable factors too. So what we do is that we will simply multiply. So this could say find the product of these two terms here. It means multiplication. Evaluate simply means you solve for it too. Okay, then we will multiply the numeral factors and multiply the variable factors likewise. So let's go ahead. Solution. Our solution for this will be as follows. We have here 8x squared, open close bracket, or we could use the multiplication sign. I'm not using multiplication sign to avoid confusion with the x's in this case. Alright, so once we put bracket, it means multiplication. So what you do first step is this. I will write the steps in red. So you're going to say 8 times negative 3. Be careful, this is not saying 8 minus 3, this is saying 8 times negative 3. So you could put bracket here too, so as to differentiate it. And then you can put x squared times x to the fourth. Notice this x squared came from here and this x to the fourth came from here. Now the next step, 8 times a negative 3. Well, the multiplication of two different signs will give us the negative, and 8 times 3 will give us 24. And then we recall the law of indices that says a base to a power times that base to different power. We'll keep the base and simply add their powers. Okay, so we have to be recalling the laws of indices. So this becomes now x2 plus 4. Okay, let me zoom into that a little bit more. And then the next step will be negative 24x to the 6, and that is your solution of multiplying two monomials. Now from this there is something that can be suggested, or what we should be able to observe. So let me write that which you should have observed from this multiplication. 2 multiply 2 monomials. Now when they say multiply two monomials, we don't mean they always have to be two monomials. It could be 3 monomials, 4 monomials, but to multiply them 2 by 2 by 2. So whenever you multiply 2, you get that result and multiply it with the other monomial. Okay, so when multiplying two monomials, multiply the numerical factors, okay, which I did, which was the 8 and the negative 3, or in other words, the coefficients. That is what we did. Okay, now and then multiply the variable factors. Okay, that's what we did there. We simply multiply the two coefficients and then the variable factors. If you notice there, and we apply the law of indices. Okay, so let's try a few more examples before you can attempt some on your own also. So our next example, we won't be writing so much information, we're just going to the multiplication. 3x to the fourth times 2x to the fifth. This could be said multiply. All right, equals. First thing, you multiply the two coefficients. What are the coefficients here? The 3 and the 2. So you will say 3 times 2, then times x to the fourth times x to the fifth. We are separating them, okay? And then the next part says 3 times 2 will give us 6, x to the fourth. Recall the law of indices that says if they were multiplying two bases of the same kind, we'll keep the base and simply add their powers. This now gives us 6x to the 9, and that is our solution. Okay, let me do that 9 better, and that's our solution. Okay, not much steps to be shown when you're multiplying monomials. Now let's go with a monomial where we have more than one variable. Okay, so our next example, we have negative 2 a squared b cubed, open bracket 5ab squared. Okay, this should not be difficult also, but we must recall the law, okay, and how we separate them. So we separate like terms with like terms. We can only combine like terms. So we're going to have a negative 2 here. We say negative 2 times 5, and then we have a squared, a to the first. Any letter by itself is always to the first power. Okay, so this becomes now a squared times a to the first. I would encourage you to write the one when you're doing your calculations so you don't skip it. All right, this gives us b to the third times b to the second. The next step now is negative 2 times 5 gives a negative 10. Then here the law of indices says that if we have the same base and we have different powers, we'll keep the base and add their powers. So we put a 2 plus 1, b 3 plus 2. Then the last step for that problem will be negative 10 a to the third, b to the fifth, and that's our solution. Okay, so there's nothing much to be done with these monomials. It's just that you separate them and multiply like terms with like terms. Let's do two more examples. So we're going to go with two more examples on this topic here, multiplying monomials. Okay, so we have an example here. We have negative 4y to the fifth z squared. I'm going to do the z with a little dash so as to differentiate it from the 2y cubed z cubed close bracket times 3yz. Now this means that it's the same concept. All you need to do is simply take piece by piece by piece. Okay, so let's see how this works. I'm going to do the steps here because it's a long step. So let me expand, zoom into this part of our screen. Okay, so we are right there. So we say now negative 4 times 2 times the 3, and then we say y to the fifth times the y to the third times the y to the first, and then we look at the z squared times z to the third times z to the first. Then we go one more step. Negative 4 times 2 will give us negative 8, and negative 8 times 3 will give us negative 24. Okay, so we can even go one more step and continue with this, or you can work out positive values if you want. That's up to you. So let's go one more step so you can see step by step. Negative 4 times positive 2 will give us a negative 8 times 3. Apply the laws of indices. Y to the fifth plus 3 plus 1, z second plus 3 plus 1. Next step, negative 8 times 3, negative 24, y 5 plus 3 plus 1, 9, and z will give us 2 plus 3 plus 1, 6, and that's our solution. Okay, so notice despite they had three different terms in there to be multiplied, we could still combine them. Okay, let's do our next example on monomials. We have 3/4 x squared y cube open close bracket times 8 thirds xy squared. Take note that the x and the y are not below the division sign. They are above actually, because they are actually whole values. All right, so the way you're going to work this out again is the same process. You're going to say 3/4 times 8 thirds times x to the second times x to the first times y to the third times y to the second. Okay, equals. Now here, can I cancel anything? Yes. 3 could go into 3 as 1, and here 1. 4 could go here, and 4 could go here 2. So we have 2 times 2, no, 1 times 2, 2 over 1 times 1. So let me show that step. 1 times 2, 2. 1 times 1, 1. Apply the laws of indices. We get x 2 plus 1, y 3 plus 2. This gives us a next step. Well, we all know that any number divided by 1 is always that number itself, and that gives us x to the third, y to the fifth. This is the multiplication of monomials. All right. A tip, a word of advice on this type of problems. Notice that we multiply the numerical coefficients first of all, okay, and then to multiply the variable factors with like bases, keep the base and add the exponent. That is what we did. So when multiplying monomials, just follow these basic rules. You will multiply the numerical values, okay, and then you multiply the variables with like bases and keep the base and add the exponents. So let me write that as a reminder how to go ahead in multiplying this. To multiply monomials, okay. So first thing is that we will multiply the numerical coefficients. That's what we did, okay. And then to multiply the factors, multiply the variable factors with like bases. You will keep now the base and add the exponents. That's what you will be doing when you're multiplying monomials.